So Deontay Wilder KOs Bermane Stiverne in 1 round. Absolutely pathetic fight. It didn't look like Bermane Stiverne was even in mental condition, let alone physical condition, to be in an athletic competition. He didn't look fit to compete, period. It was obviously just a payday for him. So I tweeted a poll right before the fight last night, in what round will Wilder Stiverne 2 end tonight? And less than 100 of you voted. That tells you how much interest there was in this fight. Maybe I should have, tweeted that poll out a few days ago, whatever. But 35% of you said rounds 4 to 6. That's where I thought it'd go. I actually thought that Wilder would just stick behind the jab, but clearly him and his team knew what they were facing. And he just went out there and just threw crazy right hands from the opening bell. It didn't even go 3 minutes, man. So I wanted to talk about that fight a little bit, but more so about the whole heavyweight landscape, because Anthony Joshua just fought a week ago against Carlos Takam, and a awkward kind of defense, but a dominant performance over a quality heavyweight. Takam, I think, is probably a top 10, right at the bottom of the top 10 American worldwide heavyweights right now. So I think that was a good win for Joshua, all things considered. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But everyone's talking about Wilder, Joshua, Wilder. Who's ducking who? Because Wilder has been talking about Joshua, but hasn't been signing no deals or even talking about contracts, this, that, the other. There was talk about Dillian Whyte. Him and Eddie Hearn were going back and forth about money with Dillian Whyte, who fought on AJ's undercard a week ago, and is now the WBC silver champion, which is kind of like a mandatory for the WBC, but not really, because Dominick Breazeale is now the WBC mandatory. So all kinds of stuff going back and forth, sanctioning body madness. I'm going to break it all down for you guys. Let's talk about Deontay Wilder, who's now 39-0 with 38 KOs. And, talked about the KO one over Stiverne last night. Absolutely pathetic. Deontay Wilder, he's held the WBC title now for 2.5 years. He's defended it 6 times. He beat Stiverne the first time in January of 2015. Since he has fought Eric Molina, Johan Duapas, Arthur Szpilka, Chris Arreola, Gerald Washington, and now Stiverne again. Not exactly a murderer's row. Now, to his defense, he was going to fight Alexander Povetkin. He was going to fight Luis Ortiz. And we know what happened there. No need to rehash all of that. So those 2 instances are not on Deontay Wilder. But lackluster performances against lackluster opposition. Remember, man, Duapas, Szpilka, even Molina, Washington, they all won rounds against Wilder and connected. He got busted up in a couple of those fights. His eyes swelled up pretty bad, and he got injured because he fought so fundamentally flawed in those fights. Those injuries he sustained to his hands, I think to his elbow, maybe his shoulder, those injuries come from throwing punches improperly, from bad angles, and getting caught. It's hard when you got long arms. You got to fight from a distance. You can't get in close and throw these wild windmill kind of shots that Wilder does. So those injuries could have been prevented had he fought more disciplined. But he was obviously fighting down to the level of his opposition. So look, his reign's been really, really poor. It's a mixture of fault. Some of it's good old Uncle Al doing what he does. Some of it's on Deontay himself, because even though these were lackluster opponents, he shouldn't have lost a round against any of these guys. Maybe the first round as you're sizing them up. But to lose 2, 3, 4 rounds in some of these fights, I thought he was losing to Gerald Washington on the cards, on my card, before he knocked him out. That's pretty poor. And to get injured against these lackluster opponents, that's not good either. So some of this is on Wilder, right? And then, of course, some of it is on Povetkin and Ortiz. But let's go back to the WBC and Bermane Stiverne, because I tweeted about this a couple times. Well, I've talked about it a lot on the Neutral Corner and just the last few weeks. Stiverne had no business being the mandatory. Now, I know, Luis Ortiz, it was going to be Wilder Ortiz, and then Ortiz with the performance-enhancing drugs. Okay, on the co-main, it was going to be Bermane Stiverne versus Dominick Breazeale for the right to be a mandatory. Stiverne was already named mandatory. He's been mandatory by the WBC forever ago, all right? He was coming into this card. Uncle Al worked his magic. He wants a fight between Wilder and Breazeale. Because earlier this year, after the Gerald Washington fight in Birmingham, Alabama, where Wilder's from, Breazeale fought on the undercard for that fight, and we all know, made TMZ Sports, right? There was a big ruckus in the, I can't remember which hotel, but it was a hotel, the Fight Hotel in Birmingham, between Deontay Wilder's crew and Dominick Breazeale's crew. There's a big fight there, and now that made big news down there in Birmingham. There's not a whole lot going on there in professional sports in Birmingham, Alabama. College football is religion down there, but professional sports, not much going on. So when their heavyweight champion, his crew, gets in a fight with Dominick Breazeale's crew, that's a marketable fight down there. It makes sense, and Uncle Al's been trying to make that happen. So even though Stavern was mandatory, Wilder and Uncle Al and his people paid Stavern some step-aside cash to fight Dominick Breazeale. The winner of that fight, which would have been Breazeale, would be the new mandatory. But of course, all this stuff happened with Ortiz, and the WBC, in their infinite wisdom, instead of maybe putting Breazeale in there against Wilder, they put Stavern in there because he was the mandatory. So how did Stavern even get a mandatory spot? From that first fight against Wilder in January of 2015, Stavern was exactly 1-0. He fought Derek Rossi, who dropped him in the first round. He got a gift decision against him. Many people feel Rossi won that fight. I think Rossi's gone on to fight like 3 more times, and he's lost either 2 or 3 of those fights. Maybe he won 1 fight. But I don't even think it was a 10-rounder. I think it was like an 8-rounder or something. So Stavern weighed 239 pounds for that first Wilder fight. He weighed 254 against Rossi. Guess what he weighed against Wilder last night? 254. So, in other words, he was a slop of tub of lard who was showing up to get a payday. This was Don King working his magic with the WBC. He goes back with the Suleiman family forever. Some money was exchanging hands. He must have owed Stavern a favor. Suleiman owed Don King a favor. They exchanged favors behind closed doors to get Stavern a mandatory. There were literally dozens of more deserving heavyweights to be a WBC mandatory than Bermane Stavern, who, I don't even know, just BoxRec, okay? BoxRec, which is their ratings are done by a computer, and their ratings should not be taken seriously. But it is interesting that I don't even think Stavern was rated in the top 50 under BoxRec's computer-based ratings before this fight. I think he is now. Now he's in the ratings because he fought a heavyweight titleist. But before this fight, I want to say that he wasn't even in the top 50 for BoxRec, right? And then all the editorial boards, you know, whether it's Ring Magazine or Boxing Monthly Magazine, I'm on both of those ratings boards. We didn't have Stavern rated anywhere near the top 10, probably not even top 20. So how this guy got a mandatory position is disgusting. But on the undercard of Wilder Stavern 2, Dominick Breazeale beats Eric Molina, who coincidentally enough lost to Deontay Wilder in 2015 and lost to Anthony Joshua in 2016. It was only rated number 12 by the WBC, but somehow is elevated into this mandatory eliminator against Dominick Breazeale. Man, the WBC, I mean, I try not to beat up on the sanctioning bodies because the WBC does do some things right. I like the clean boxing program. It could be vastly improved. The budget needs to be increased exponentially. I like the 30 and 7-day weigh-in rule they have. I think it should be all year round. I think titleists in boxing should have to report and weigh in every 60 to 90 days, and they should be within 20% of the division that they hold a title for. So this stuff can be approved, but I like where the WBC is going with the fighter safety stuff. But some of these ratings in these mandatory fights are just absolutely disgusting. And last night, you want to talk about fighter safety, Bermane Stavern looked like a guy who shouldn't have even been sanctioned to fight. He looked like a guy who didn't belong. Okay, baseball fans out there, you'll get this reference. Yu Darvish in Game 7 for the Los Angeles Dodgers, he looked like he belonged more in that game than Bermane Stavern looked like he belonged in the fight last night against Deontay Wilder. Okay, so Breazeale was rated number 6 by the WBC coming in, Molina number 12, and somehow they fight for this eliminator. Showtime didn't think enough of that fight to even televise it, right? They televised Lipinet's title-winning effort over Kondo, and which was not a very good decision. The cards were way too wide in that fight, but Lipinets deserved the victory. They televised Porter Granados, which I believe was an eliminator to get Uncle Al was lining up Porter to get another fight with Keith Thurman next year. They televised those fights over this heavyweight eliminator fight. That's how little they thought of it. But Breazeale wins. My thing is, WBC, I'm just looking at the rating. I printed the ratings here. You had Andy Ruiz rated number 4. Why not him? You had Oscar Rivas, a Colombian fighter, undefeated. Why not him? He's rated number 10. Here's a name. Amir Mansour. Remember Amir Mansour, who fought Breazeale and was up 5 rounds to 0 against Breazeale, dropped him. He was dropped himself, but he dropped Breazeale. I think that had been the first time Breazeale had been dropped that I can remember. But then he had a jaw injury, and that fight was over. But he was beating Breazeale, dominating him, honestly, before that fight was stopped due to injury. Came back from that, beat Travis Kaufman in March. He's only rated number 21 by the WBC. How is Amir Mansour, a guy who was beating up on Dominick Breazeale before an injury stopped that fight, then came in his comeback fight and beat Travis Kaufman, who was rated by the BC at the time? How is he only rated number 1, but guys like Eric Molina are rated number 12? All these other guys, I'm just looking at the ratings. I'm not going to name all these names. You guys won't know half of them. How is Mansour not in the mix here? And how did he not deserve a rematch against Breazeale in that fight? You see, WBC, you didn't have to put Eric Molina in there. You could have bumped up Amir Mansour and given an entertaining rematch. But politics had their way. Okay, so what's up with Deontay Wilder now for next year? People are talking about Wilder-Joshua. I hate to burst your bubble, guys. That fight's not happening next year. It's going to happen in 2019. For Deontay Wilder and Uncle Al, Q1 next year, it's going to be Dominick Breazeale. My hope is that they don't wait till May or June to make that fight, but rather it happens in February, March. Neither guy took much punishment. I think Breazeale went about 8 rounds with Molina, and that was basically him punching a heavy bag until Molina's side retired. So if I'm Team Wilder, handle that mandatory situation early next year against Breazeale. Do that in Birmingham, where it will do a sellout crowd. It'll do good business down there. It'll be a fairly entertaining fight. See if you can get Breazeale out of there quicker than Joshua did. That'll be a bragging right you have. But then, summer to fall, somewhere in that timeline, it's time to go over to the UK and fight Dillian Whyte. Now, Dillian Whyte beat Robert Helenius, who is basically another punching bag, a human punching bag, last week to become the WBC silver titleist, whatever the hell that means. And eventually, he's going to be the mandatory after this Breazeale thing works out, after Al gets the fight he wanted. Now it's going to be time for Eddie Hearn to get the fight he wants. And we know that, I think, $3 million was offered before, and Wilder turned it down. He's talking about $7 million, which we all know is ridiculous and he doesn't deserve. The real figure is going to be somewhere in the middle. I think it'll be $4 to $5 million. And I think it makes sense. If you bring Deontay Wilder over to the UK to fight Dillian Whyte, if you're Team Wilder, you saw what Dillian Whyte did against Robert Helenius, and I don't think he was holding back. That's the level. Dillian Whyte, maybe top 10, maybe a top 10 heavyweight. I think he might fall just short of the top 10. I think Carlos Takam, somebody like that, would beat Dillian Whyte. Good quality fighter, gatekeeper level fighter, but I think Deontay Wilder should be heavily favored in that matchup. So if you're Wilder and his team, go over to the UK next year. Make a relatively easy, collect a relatively easy $4 to $5 million and build to a fight with Joshua in 2019. You get in front of the UK fans, right? That atmosphere, Showtime Boxing can show that. They've shown several of those UK cards already. So that makes too much sense not to happen. What I'm wondering about is, will Wilder have to fight or sign a 2 to 3 fight deal with Hearn? Remember, Wilder doesn't technically have a promoter. Lou DiBella's been promoting these Barclays cards for the PBC because they have a deal worked out with the ownership there, and they get site fees and all this kind of stuff, so they can paper that arena and still do financially okay there. But Dillian Whyte ain't coming to America to fight at Barclays. That makes absolutely no damn sense. You're going over there for that fight. But will Hearn want a 2-fight deal, a 3-fight deal, and at the back end of that deal is the fight between Wilder and Joshua? I don't know. He has a good enough working relationship with Al Haymon where I don't think that needs to happen. The interesting part, and I think the hiccup to that fight eventually happening, is the Showtime versus HBO thing. Because eventually, HBO is going to outbid Showtime for Anthony Joshua, and they're going to win. By some point next year, Anthony Joshua is going to be an exclusive HBO fighter. That's what's going to happen, okay? And when that happens, you're going to have a split network kind of thing. It's going to be like the Klitschko-Joshua fight. I think that's what we're going to see, where HBO and Showtime get a piece of that fight. It's going to be difficult to negotiate. It's going to require some buildup. That's why I'm telling you guys, ain't happening until 2019. So let's talk about Anthony Joshua, who has the WBA, IBF titles. He's 20-0 now with 20 knockouts. Last week had that awkward but dominant win over Carlos Takam. And as I've told you guys, when you're a tall, long fighter and you're fighting a short, squat fighter, and I know Takam's like 6'2", 6'3", but as a heavyweight now, he's short and squat. It's awkward. It's hard to hit a guy in the chin when he's rolling and slipping and ducking and moving like this. It's hard to get the guy here. You can get him up here. You can get him on the side of the head, the top of the head, back of the head, whatever. You can't get him here. So a lot of you are complaining about that performance by Joshua, but I thought, look, I'm 6'4". I get it. You know, I've sparred guys who are 5'11". It's hard to catch them sometimes, right? And if they're fighting like this and they're always sliding, always on the back foot and doing shoulder rolls, you can't hit them clean. Maybe Takam won a round in that fight. But Joshua, who broke his nose early on in the fight, I thought showed some intestinal fortitude, some toughness, hung in there, took some shots, and did fairly well. And as I said before, I think Takam is probably the number 9, number 10 heavyweight right now in the division. So, if you're Anthony Joshua, people have said he needs to come over to America to really become the world heavyweight champion. Really? Really? This guy has crazy options. He did 90,000 fans for the Klitschko fight. And yeah, he was the B-side in terms of name recognition globally in that fight. Fine. But that fight elevated him to a new status. He did over 70,000 for Takam, who was originally going to be Kubrat Pulev. And Pulev pulled out because of injury. No need to rehash that. So this guy put 160,000 plus butts in seats this year. No other boxer, no one has done anything like that in a long, long time. So every single heavyweight out there that fights Anthony Joshua isn't just the A side. He's the A++++ side to any heavyweight boxer out there not named Klitschko. The only person who would be a level A side with him at this point is one of the Klitschko brothers. Outside of that, everyone else is a B-, or below. And that includes Deontay Wilder. So if you're AJ, man, don't rush it. Why go over to America and fight Wilder there? It does nothing for you. Entice. I used the word lure in some tweets recently, and that upset some of you. It triggered some of you because you misunderstood what I was saying. Lure Wilder over to the UK, I mean entice him. Bring him over, because he's probably not reaching for his passport to stamp it right now. It's going to take some enticing. Entice him with the dollars. Keep putting butts in seats. And eventually, that super fight will build up. The reward will be so high that Wilder and his people will finally take the risk and go over there and do it. But for right now, you got options. Look, the IBF mandatory is fulfilled for now because of Carlos Takam. But the IBF, I think, eventually, Pulev pulled out because of injury. He wasn't punished for any specific reason, nothing like that. So I do think Pulev will be in line for another mandatory shot. It could happen. He might have to do a fight to get it or something, but maybe there's going to be another IBF mandatory at some point by the end of next year. But for right now, he's clear. And there's no WBA mandatory lined up that I can see right now. So Wilder's got options. I know some of you won't want to hear this, but the winner between the Bellew-Hay rematch, I know, I don't love that fight either. I'm not even interested in Bellew-Hay 2 myself. But the winner of that fight against Anthony Joshua next year around April or May, and Joshua is a 2 times a year fighter now, that fight makes so much dollars, it makes unbelievable sense, right? And it's probably going to be Bellew again. He's one of the best talkers in boxing. And over there in the UK, that sells out Wembley. It just does. It's not that competitive of a fight, at least on paper, but consider this. In terms of skill set, other than Vladimir Klitschko, Bellew is probably the most skilled opponent of Anthony Joshua's career. I know it sounds crazy because Bellew is not really an elite level fighter, doesn't have elite level skills, but maybe he falls short of Carlos Takam in terms of skills. Other than him, and of course, he's not on Klitschko's stratosphere. Other than them, name another opponent Joshua's had who could compete with Bellew skill-wise. I'd probably favor Bellew to beat every one of Anthony Joshua's opponents right now, not named Vladimir Klitschko. Think about that. Look back at Joshua's resume and get back to me and tell me if you disagree. So that fight is marketable, makeable, and will likely happen in the spring of next year. That's what we're going to see. Now, some people have talked about Tyson Fury. And, you know, last week he tweets, I'm coming back. Basically a week before that, I'm never fighting again. The British Board of Boxing Control has an issue with him because of the performance-enhancing drugs Tyson Fury used before the Klitschko fight and the recreational banned drugs he used after the Klitschko fight, which I think that fight should have an asterisk next to it. I don't rate Tyson Fury at all. But he's got to handle all that before he can even come back. The guy clearly has mental illness. And for those of you who are salivating at the thought of a Joshua Fury fight, I know that it makes a lot of sense, but Fury weighs well over 300 pounds. And he's probably in worse shape than Berman Stavern. Better fighter than Berman Stavern on his worst day, yes. But probably in worse shape physically, mentally, and emotionally than Stavern was last night against Deontay Wilder. So think about that. Think about the competitiveness of that fight. Also, think back to the Oliver McCall situation and the mental illness he had and him breaking down and starting to cry in the middle of his the biggest fight of his career up to that point, probably ever in his entire career, what he's most known for and remembered for now. Those of you who don't even know who Oliver McCall is, if you're a new boxing fan or whatever, just Google it, look it up. Look up his rematch with Lewis and see the breakdown. That is what we could see from Tyson Fury. He needs to get right mentally and emotionally. So if I'm Team Joshua, I'm not paying any attention to Tyson Fury at this point. Here's the X factor here. And here's a guy that a lot of people are forgetting about. Joseph Parker. Joseph Parker recently had a fight against Hughie Fury. That was in the UK. Didn't look great. Was a horrible fight. But he clearly won a fairly competitive fight against a tall fighter, Hughie Fury. Now, if you're Anthony Joshua, take care of business against Tony Bellew after he beats Hay again. Do that early next year. But in your second fight of the year, September, October timeframe, lure, entice, incentivize Joseph Parker to come over to the UK and unify titles with you. He's fought over there once. There's some name recognition. He's with a smart, intelligent promoter, partially with Bob Arum, who would do business with Hearn. It makes a lot of sense, and it's a fairly big fight there. Well, any fight Joshua's in is a big fight in the UK, but that's a unification fight, man. That's to bring together 3 titles. All right, so let's talk about Joseph Parker, who holds the WBO title, 24-0, 18 knockouts. Hasn't looked that impressive since winning the title against Andy Ruiz last year. Didn't look that impressive in that fight. Here's what's interesting about the era we live in. And it's not just in the heavyweight division. We live in an era of prospects with world titles. And what you see sometimes, and this is what separates the contenders from the pretenders, is a prospect who can look really, really good and fight some names that we recognize, albeit they might be faded, they might be on their way out, but they have some impressive wins at the prospect level. We give them the benefit of the doubt for having some wins where they don't look great, but they look impressive enough at that level against certain names. But then you're supposed to graduate from prospect to contender. And some guys just don't make that leap. Now, we've seen Anthony Joshua grow up in front of our eyes. And this year, we saw him go from a prospect with a title, which is what he was when he beat Charles Martin, to a real bona fide elite level heavyweight in that one fight against Vladimir Klitschko. Was it 10, 11 rounds? That's what Klitschko did for Joshua. That's what Joshua has done for the division. He's graduated from prospect to contender to the top middleweight in the world in that one fight. Deontay Wilder, say what you will about him. In that first fight with Bermane Stiverne, he went from prospect to legitimate top-level contender in that one fight. Now, since then, he's kind of, his rating maybe dipped a little bit. His value, his stock, if you will, maybe has dipped a little bit because of certain issues. But he's proven he's a legitimate top-level heavyweight. Joseph Parker hasn't gotten past that prospect with the title level, right? He hasn't had the performance. Like, he fought Andy Ruiz. He just fought Hughie Fury. He hasn't had that performance where he looked improved. He looked dominant. He looked special. He's kind of stayed at that level. He's plateaued. So what does this mean? This means that he's probably going to get beat at some point by somebody like an Andy Ruiz, a Hughie Fury, maybe a Carlos Takam, maybe a Dillian Whyte. Somebody at that level is going to beat Joseph Parker in a fight where Parker might make $1 million, but he's not making life-changing money. And then he loses that title and he loses that little bargaining chip that he does have. So what should he do? I think if I'm Bob Arum, who owns a piece of him, and I'm his team, I'm looking to cash out toward the end of 2018 because here's the situation. Alexander Povetkin is about to fight Christian Hammer for the WBO mandatory position. Now, the WBO hasn't announced it's going to be for the mandatory yet, but trust me, they will in the coming weeks. This will be for the #1 mandatory position. Say what you will about Povetkin and the ethics of this, it is what it is. Hammer has no business. I believe Hammer, I got the WBO ratings right here. Hammer is somehow rated #1 right now by the WBO, which is insane. And Povetkin is rated #6. So Povetkin is going to fight Christian Hammer for this mandatory position, and obviously Povetkin's going to annihilate the guy. It's in Russia. So, bottom line, Parker's going to have the mandatory of Povetkin. He's going to have a year to fulfill that. As much money as Arum can put up and they can put up to put that fight in New Zealand, it's not going to compete with the money Rabinski and Povetkin's people are going to put up to put that fight in Russia. So, the eventual Parker-Povetkin WBO heavyweight title fight late next year will take place in Russia. If you're Joseph Parker, do you want to fight Povetkin in Russia late next year? Or do you want to try to unify titles with either Deontay Wilder in America or Anthony Joshua in the UK? Now we get into the ethics of this. Which one of those three guys deserves that big fight? Not that Joseph Parker is bringing anything big to the table himself, but he's bringing that title, guys. Does Povetkin deserve a title shot? I'm going to leave that question up to you, okay? Given his history. Does Deontay Wilder deserve a big unification fight? Does he deserve Joseph Parker coming over to America and fighting at Barclays in Brooklyn, or maybe in Las Vegas at the MGM where Uncle Al still has some pull? Does he deserve that? Or Anthony Joshua, who can guarantee a packed Wembley, who can, through Eddie Hearn, pay Joseph Parker life-changing money, hand over fist millions and millions of dollars, to come up there and unify titles with Joshua. And stylistically, because Joshua is a little robotic and stiff, he's getting better, he's getting looser, but he's getting more muscular with each fight. I actually think Wilder would mop the floor with Parker just because of his arm length. His arms are longer than Joshua's. And I think he'd absolutely just decapitate the dude. With Joshua, don't get me wrong, I heavily favor Joshua over Parker. But just the way their bodies match up and their styles, I think Parker will go more rounds with Joshua than he would with a very motivated, 100% focused Deontay Wilder. It's just the way I see it, guys. You might disagree with me. Either way, he's going to lose, and it's going to be by knockout. But I think, obviously, the right thing to do is to go over there to the UK late next year, unify titles with Anthony Joshua. Here's the silver lining for all the negativity I've said about Parker. He's fought a few tall guys. He's fought Alexander Dimitrenko. He's probably 6'7", 6'8". He fought Razvan Kojanu earlier this year, who I think is 6'7", and he just fought Fury, who's 6'7". So he's fought a few tall guys. Obviously nowhere near the skill level or athleticism or power of a Wilder or a Joshua, but at least he's fought and gone dozens of rounds now with tall guys that he's punching up at. So he does have that experience. It's helped prepare him somewhat for that fight. And he did fight Carlos Takam, who posed some athleticism and some defensive maneuvers that gave him trouble. Andy Ruiz, some hand speed there. Not very active, but a lot of hand speed. So he's seen some different styles. He's as ready for a fight with Wilder or Joshua as he's ever going to be. So I think Grandpa Bob can work his magic with the WBO. The WBO is in business with Top Rank every bit as much as the WBC is in business with the PBC and Al Haymon. So Grandpa Bob can work some magic and get an exemption from Parker on the Povetkin mandatory, push that back a little bit, and late next year get a unification fight with Anthony Joshua, go to the UK, make $6, $7, $8 million possibly in a massive fight over there. Here's the thing. Obviously, I like Joshua in that fight. Joshua will inherit the Povetkin mandatory. I know ethically a lot of you don't think that Povetkin deserves that fight with Joshua, but if he stays clean, he's in year-round VADA testing now. If he can stay clean and keep winning, an eventual fight, maybe early 2019, between Anthony Joshua and Alexander Povetkin is one of the best fights in the heavyweight division, obviously, but one of the best fights in all of boxing. And when it comes to money, I think that Eddie Hearn and the folks at Matchroom are going to have enough money to put up to bring Povetkin and his people over to the UK. I don't think they'd have to worry about going over to Russia to do that fight, where they'd be very, very nervous. I think that they'll have enough money to put up to bring Povetkin over to the UK. So imagine Anthony Joshua fighting the Bellew Hay winner early next year. Yeah, we don't love that fight, but we get it. Brand building, interesting fight, for the circus perspective. Then he gets Joseph Parker. Then early 2019, fights Alexander Povetkin. And then by the end of 2019, we get the Joshua Wilder super fight. That's pie in the sky, best case scenario. And man, that'd be a hell of a run for AJ. So this is what I see happening next year. This is what I think should happen. Will it happen this way exactly? Obviously not, because this is boxing. But this is what should happen. For Deontay Wilder, fight Breazeale in Alabama earlier in the year, then go over to the UK to fight Dillian Whyte maybe in the summer, fall, help build up for that eventual fight with AJ. If you can squeeze in a third fight against a layup back at Barclays or something at the very end of 2018, do it. Stay busy. Anthony Joshua, Bellew Hay 2 winner earlier in the year, then get Joseph Parker over there September, October to unify titles. For Joseph Parker, maybe get a voluntary defense in the spring, summer. If you can get 2 of those, get them. But maybe 1 or 2 voluntary fights and then cash out against AJ in the UK in September, October. That's what I think should happen. That's what I hope will happen. We probably know it won't exactly happen that way. Let me know what you guys think about this, man. Back real quick, one last note on this WBC situation. This was just such a pathetic fight. And I know there's going to be some of you out there who are going to say, look, man, on the same day over in Monte Carlo, the WBA had Dominick Breazeale fighting Trent Broadhurst, who is a piano tuner or something from Australia, or a dog walker or something, a pet therapist. I don't know what the guy does. But he had no business fighting for a WBA light heavyweight title against Dominick Breazeale. And it looked every bit as non-competitive as Wilder Stavern. It was another first-round KO. I get it, guys. But at least I could say this much about Trent Broadhurst. From 2015, the beginning of 2015, to his fight with Bivol last night, Broadhurst had fought 7 times. So, in the span between the first Wilder-Stavern fight and the second one, where Stavern had fought once, this Broadhurst guy had fought 7 times. Now, did he deserve a title shot? No. But at least he was in athletic condition for an athletic competition. At least we can say that much. Okay? That's the difference. That's why it's apples and oranges. So some of you who are going to try to make that comparison, yeah, it's all fruit, but it's not apples to apples, apples to oranges. All right, guys, that's it. Like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you at the fights.